Okay, so Salman Rushdie at one level addresses radical social political changes brought about by India's independence, partition, and the formation of Pakistan. He also interrogates the promises by our political leaders and its failures, and in this way, he is also supplementing the official narrative of national independence of India. At one level, we can read it as a postmodern text where he is giving you a exhaustive representation of India, where he is commodifying each and everything, whether it is society, culture, language, and especially for Western consumption. It is also post-colonial text where he is talking about post-colonial conditions of India and he is juxtaposing stories and cultural practices from different religious and cultural perspectives. Again, I talked to you about dialectical relationship, which is showing, which is inherent in post-independent India, the dialectical relationship between freedom and terror, freedom without terror and freedom with terror. Actually, you can say, as Salim Sinai is a metaphor, now, who wants to enjoy this freedom, but see how terror is intervening his life. If you remember the last scene of the movie, what we find that after the emergency is over, till emergency, what we find, all darkness. After emergency there is sunshine, and he weeps. He weeps because he is happy now. He finds a hint of freedom. Before that he was always terrorized. He was under terror, he was under jail. So he is a metaphor of the nation, and it's a monstrous figuration of the body also, which you can say juxtaposes with anything which we can which we can say normal. So the nation itself is monstrous. You can say the birth of nation was not a normal birth. Okay. So terror of the post-colonial modernity is registered here in this novel. Now, more or less, this novel talks about the failure of secular project of Nehruvian states and era, and especially that vision how it is thrashed aside by Indira Gandhi. Okay, he is taking risk to play with the contemporary uh, reality of the time, political reality of the time. This is a big risk, and he is known for taking risks. When he wrote Satanic Verses, it was a great risk because in Satanic Verses he had to go for hiding. There was a kind of fatwa from Ayatollah Khomeini, which I have told you in my earlier lecture. So there is a very, very important, you can say, uh, fact about this novel is that the novel, though it talks about those children who are born at the midnight, the structure of the novel retains its elitist phenomenon. Most of the groups are elitist. We are not getting sufficient stories from subaltern groups. Okay, they face a form of political violence. That's all. Okay, so from the beginning, uh, acha, let me talk about some more issues here. Yeah. Briefly, not in much detail. How is taking India's setting, but uh, within few chapters, the entire story moves to Pakistan. Yeah. A big portion, after a big portion in Pakistan, the story moves to Bangladesh and again back to India. So the cyclic tradition of telling story, the Indian style of telling story is employed here, which I will talk to you uh, in my lecture today. So, what I wanted to talk about, hybridity as a very, very important issue, as well as a very, very important uh, theme of the novel. This hybridity is at various levels, creating this text, no? The whole endeavor that Rushdie is trying to show you how a hybrid text can be produced. Neither it is purely following the form of novel, means the tight structure of novel, nor it is following the oral tradition or the tradition of Indian tradition of telling a story, which is cyclic. It is actually mixing the both things. When we talk about hybridity, we get some chapters like Mythold. But before that, let us talk about hybridity in colonial India. See, the relationship between the colonizer and colonized made both, no, both hybrid, because both were influenced by each other because of the interactions. And it is very important to remember that some of the 18th century British, no, in India, okay, they were often uh, they were often seen to go native, and they were called nabobs. Okay, it's a very important factor. However, what is important is that colonized people were at receivers end, they had to be subjugated. All right, but hybridity is something which is a permanent character of human being. That we can't expect something pure and pristine, because that pure and pristine origin is a myth actually. Okay, and more you try to search it, no, more it will differ. And let me talk about within the context of the novel how it is hybrid. From the hybridity is very, very important factor. From the beginning you find the most, or you can say the best example of this hybridity is Mythold. He is an example of actually colonial, or you can say the persistence of the colonial intermixed with the post-colonial. That is reflected when he is selling his building as a departing Englishman. When he sells, when he is selling his estate in Bombay, what is a particular condition he is putting, that all the articles there, okay, he is selling his estate to these Indians, and the condition which he puts is that these people must retain all his furniture and fittings and carry on just as he did, to make a self-proclaimed allegory. This is the page number 95, 97. If you read that page number, you will find this condition. And later on we find that he is especially one of several fathers of Salim Sinai. Okay, and this hybridity is perceived when we find that how Ahmad Sinai's skin is turning white. And he says, what he says? He is secretly pleased actually, and he says, all the best people are white under the skin. I have merely given up pretending. That's important. Actually, here a theory is built up by Sinai. Okay, a theory which Salim Sinai advances here about the people of the first decade India, okay, after independence, that their big effort involved in, this is page number 179, you can write down the page number 179, okay. Now, the biggest efforts of these people were what? Efforts involved in taking over from the British had similarly turned the businessmen of India white as well. They became white as well. It is symbolic. What does it mean? It means that they started, no, they started uh, those practices. They started those practices which white people used to do during their times. So they are now new rulers, new white people, Indian white people, okay, who must take advantage of the situation, who must marginalize the native subalterns, who must, you can say, uh, uh, become a cruel person like the colonizer. Now, there are some another instances where we find that uh, most of the people are being sucked into a grotesque mimicry of European literature also. Yeah. And ways their culture mimicry is something which is very important. I hope that you have read these terms, hybridity and mimicry, as defined by Homi Bhabha. Okay? These are very important terms. Now, the irony of Indian elite, which he presents here, uh, important factor is that Rushdie is trying to portray that these Indian elite who are not more vulnerable to being hybridized, but who perhaps are the elite because they have been so hybridized in the first place. Means they are so hybridized, that's why they become white. Okay, so this is very important. I must quote you from uh, one very important uh, paragraph or few lines from Richard Cronin, who argues in a very unsettling comparative reading of Midnight Children. Just try to listen to it. I will share the video also. Salman Rushdie has more in common with Rudyard Kipling than with Prem Chand or Bankim Chand Chatterjee. It's very important. The claim which Rushdie makes, being an Indian, as I told you in my earlier lecture, na, that in Imaginary Homeland he says that I have the writers or writers who are migrants now of the diasporic identity, na, they must try to get that broken parts of antiquity, na, that has to be rearranged. Means to call back the home, to recreate home, na, through imagination. But here, Richard Cronin is actually unsettles that claim of Rushdie, that he is not like Indian authors, he is more like English author like Kim. Salman Rushdie has more in common with Rudyard Kipling than with Premchand or Bankim Chand Chatterjee. It is an ancestry that he resists as energetically as Salim resists the notion that his real father is an Englishman. Then there is ellipsis. But for all his efforts, Midnight's Children is better seen as a post-independence version of Kim. It's a big critical remark. It's not a short, means it's not a small thing which he's telling us. It's a big critical remark. Okay. Now, I talked to you about hybridity. The style and form of this novel is very, very, you can say, an important aspect. As I talked to you about magic realism in the novel, let me make it more clear that more than magic realism, it is his experimentation with style which is more important. Now, there are very many close non-Indian antecedents for this Midnight Children. It's a very famous claim made by Rushdie that he was very, very much influenced by Tristram Shandy, and the beginning of both the novels is more or less same. Both the novels begins with the birth of the hero or narrator, you can say, or the protagonist. Okay, but as I told you in one of my lectures, that this novel uh, has three levels of narrations. One is of the fairy tale, another is autobiographical, and another is history. And here, as a style and form, I must add that it has several levels of telling, or you can say several multiple forms. You can say he is using or intermixing several forms together, Indian as well as Western. So. Rushdie has described the style of this fiction as sub-Joycean also. No, no, that James Joyce, that he is also influenced by James Joyce. But what if you read closely the novel, you will find that it is as much in form and style as in theme. It is distinctively Indian. Okay, because it is marked on every page if you read the novel closely. Some confident deployment of Indian words and phrases, especially I gave you several words of Indian Urdu which he uses in his story during the narration. So he is actually using a hybridized English, no, a chutnified English. I will come to this term chutnified. Okay, that was a great experimentation. Such hybridization, the level of hybridization, had not been achieved by the earlier novelists of Indian writing in English, the trio, the great trio. Okay, so what is important here? That Rushdie sees this hybridization as a kind of liberating strategy, not only for himself but also for numerous subsequent Indian writers, okay, who came later. And I have talked to you at length about this issue, how he influenced a whole generation of later novelists. Okay, now in his imaginary homeland, he makes a very, very important claim, and I will counter this claim also here. He says, for as far as language is concerned, no, and he assumes that using English in this way or conquering English, he says conquering English is actually a form of final fight against colonialism. So he says, those of us who do use English do so in spite of our ambiguity towards it, or perhaps because of that, perhaps because we can find in that linguistic struggle a reflection of other struggles taking place in the real world. To conquer English may be to complete the process of making ourselves free. This is the claim which he makes. But I think that this is a kind of cheating, because in other works, especially when he publishes the vintage book of Indian writing, it's a very important book which he edits with Elizabeth West. Here he says that very important, just try to listen it. He says that this period, 50 years of Indian independence, that Indian writing in English during this period had been stronger and more important. Okay, from what? From native languages, the 18 Indian languages. He sees that Indian writing in English had been more powerful. Okay, so besides being an you can say aggrandizement of his own kind of writing, this statement is actually sweeping, or what Meenakshi Mukherjee would call that this is empty claim based on ignorance. Okay, so he was not intended to conquer the you can say colonialism or fighting the colonialism. He is actually not so liberated as he claims to be, because still he's making some claims which are false. Okay, and he how in a sweeping manner such erasure of indigenous literary culture is reflected in his critical discourse. So how can we see that? How can we say that liberation is felt by uh, conquering English? I'm not sure about it. Sometimes we can talk about it. Now, there is of course another way of looking at it. Means, however inventively and subversively he is, he remains colonized. Okay, because it is in a foreign, if not in an enemy camp. Okay, and that of colonizer. Okay, when we use the language of the colonizer, we are in his camp, though he is not our enemy. So we are aligned, perhaps. No? So, and now let me talk about his extensive use of Indian allusions and Hindi Urdu words. Whom he is cheating actually. I purposely am using this word cheating. When he is using Hindi or Urdu word, he is giving you several equivalents, synonyms in English, Indian English, sometime in British English. Okay. Is it intended for an Indian reader? And if it is intended for an Indian reader, you need not to give such equivalents. Or if it is intended for foreign readers, then you had no use of using Hindi and Urdu words. So what it is actually? It is a kind of a strategy that he is using, authenticating strategy, that is called, as Harish Trivedi would call. No? The one of the most frequent of these is the use of Hindi word as a kind of authenticating strategy to show that Rushdie knows his India from the inside as the reader does not, and has the reliability of a native informant. A very important uh, quotation by Harish Trivedi when he writes about post-colonial hybridity, Midnight's Children, in his essay. Okay, and he also, Harish Trivedi has written another very good essay on Midnight's Children. Okay, Salman the Fantoosh, very interesting essay. But uh, what he is saying actually here, Harish Trivedi, the claim which he is making, it is very open case. I am just giving you just one example from page number 62. Talak, talak, talak. The English lacks the thunderclap sound of Urdu, and anyway you know what it means. I divorce thee, I divorce thee, I divorce thee. Now, Salman Rushdie is not using any footnote like an English writer would use when he will use Indian language or words, Hindi or Urdu or Sanskrit words, like some of the Oriental tales of Robert Sadeh or Thomas Moore or Lord Byron. They have used such words and they have given the meaning in footnotes. He is not giving us any footnote. Okay, he is just using it and describing the same object. This is a strategy. Okay, for example, at page number 71, he says, I do not need to tell you that Aag means fire. So such kind of strategies he is using. Okay, so uh, it's a rich text, I have already told you, and I am talking about structure also. When I am talking about form, the structure of this novel is, again, we must talk. Uh, Often he is taking uh, uh, he's using actually Indian way of telling, or you can say narrating story. Uh, Especially this novel doesn't have a tight structure, though it begins with the birth of the narrator. But after at least 100 pages, his story again starts. Now, because some of the portion is in flashback, and there are several 7 chapters. How many chapters after the birth? There are 7 chapters, and the name are perforated sheet, na, mercurochrome, hit the spittoon, under the carpet, a public announcement, many-headed monsters, and Mythold. Now, before the narrator gets back to the original story of Salim's birth, and this takes roughly 100 pages. Na? When with Padma he complains, you better get a move on or you will die before you get yourself born. That was on 38th page. अब बीच में सब गायब. Old stories are running in a flashback. So he is using a technique to leave the narrative hanging in the air. He is not using a tight Victorian pattern of telling story. He is using Indian way of cyclic uh, way of telling story, narrating story. He digresses, breaks up the tight structure, eh, and he is borrowing the features from oral narratives also. Uh, and he's making history of the uh, individual and the history of the nation parallel. And he is also juxtaposing two temporal schemes, the chronological and the cyclical, to show the conventions of Western fiction to be rooted in Western linear time, and ancient storytelling structure which use a repetitive pattern which echoes the cyclic time of Indian thought. So here you have uh, most of the things covered in my previous lectures. So thank you for today.